We take God's standard and we take what he says and we twist it into a perverted form of itself. This is also known as the finger-pointing trap. It's where we go around and we so clearly see the sins of others, but are blind to the sins of ourselves. You know about the finger point, right? If you point a finger at one person, you have 3 pointing back at yourself. You've heard that before? This is the trap the Pharisees had fallen into. Here they were bringing this woman before Jesus, and they wanted justice for her sins. They want her to get what she deserves, but yet they want mercy for their own sins. This is a trap we all fall into from one time or another, where we will point our fingers at them and bring them before God in our prayers and say, God, what are you going to do about them? How are you going to punish them? Would you bring about punishment on them? And we're pointing a finger, forgetting that we are in the same boat that we're trying to sink them in. The scripture says we've all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. In fact, there's 3 words that Scripture uses to describe sin, and it all has to do with God's standard. God's standard is perfection and holiness, set apart. And so that first word, sin, it means to miss the mark, to not live up to that standard. A second term the Scripture uses is iniquity. And that means we take God's standard and we take what he says and we twist it into a perverted form of itself. If you've ever lusted after someone in your heart that is not your spouse, you've taken God's standard for sex and love in a marriage and you've twisted it and perverted it. It's become iniquity. If you've ever hated somebody in your heart and you wished God would take them out, you've taken that passion that God has built within us, that standard, and you've twisted it. You've perverted it. If you've ever lived as a Christ follower, receiving the forgiveness of Jesus, but not offering it to someone who has deeply wounded you, you've taken his standard and you've perverted it. Iniquity.